Hello, hello. My name is Russell, and I'm an alcoholic. And I'm grateful to be here today. I'm grateful to be sober and to be at a meeting. And this is incredible. I want to thank Philo for asking me to share. I had the privilege of meeting Philo a few years ago when we invited him down here. We flew him all the way down here to speak to us at our convention. And I got to pick him up and I got to drive him to the beach and I got to hang out with him and get to know what an incredible person he is. And thank you. Thanks for thinking of me. Glad to see you are doing well. Good to see everyone today. Happy faces from all over the world. I am Russell Bell. I am from Costa Rica, San Jose, Costa Rica, but I got sober in Los Angeles. I'm from LA. I grew up in LA and I went to school up in Palo Alto, and then I moved back to LA because I was going to be a movie star. That was my plan. I went to school and I studied biology. And before I was really suffering from alcoholic, I suffered from delusions of grandeur. I don't know about you guys, but I needed to be somebody. I needed to go somewhere. I needed to be seen and recognized. I learned here in AA that, I need like 110, 150% of your intention in order to feel normal, So I was in college and I was studying biology and I didn't really know any famous biologists, but I was also doing some plays in college and I did a play and one of the drama teachers said, "You are really good. You're really good." And so, I took that and I just went with it, and I knew I was going to be a star and I knew it was going to happen soon, probably a couple of years, maybe less. I moved to LA and I was off. And like most stars in LA, I started off waiting tables. I was waiting tables in the spaghetti factory, the old spaghetti factory on Hollywood Boulevard. That was my first waiting job. And waiting tables is an incredible job for a budding alcoholic because you spend hours sweating away, serving food to people you don't care about. You end the shift at 11 o'clock. I got cash in my pocket and I need a drink. I needed a drink every day. And I finished my shift and we would sit back in the back parking lot, me and a couple waiter friends and some of the cooks, and I'd buy a 40, from the shop next door. And they'd roll up these joints where they'd put a little bit of crack inside of them. They were called P-Dogs, and I'd drink my 40 and I'd smoke a P-Dog back there behind the old spaghetti factory. And I was on top of the world. I loved it. I loved drinking. I always loved drinking. It always worked for me. When I came into AA, I heard a speaker, Don and he shared that drinking gave him hope. And when I heard that, I was like, yes, that is why I drank, because I needed hope every day because I hated my job at the spaghetti factory. No one there knew that I was a star. They wanted their salad, they wanted their bread the certain way, and I didn't care. And it was frustrating. It was tough to be living in this fantasy. And so I drank that first sip of the 40, that first toke, and it was all going to be okay. Tomorrow was another day. That's what I loved about drinking, because every time I drank, I would just think, tomorrow's another day. It's all going to happen tomorrow. But right now, let's go ahead and get effed up, So I would just drink every night. I would have fantasized that, I'm going to be on the Johnny Carson show or I'm dating myself here, the Johnny Carson show. but I would be on the Johnny Carson show and I would share this story about hanging out at the old spaghetti factory before my stardom. And that's where I was, high and fine. And that's where I like to be. But those of you in LA, you know that if you drink in LA, you also drive in LA, because that's just what we do in LA. We drink and we drive. And that's what I did. I drank and I drove every day. When I got my second DUI, I had to go to a drunk driving program, and they had us try to calculate how many nights did you drink and drive. And I calculated probably about 2,000 times I drank and drove. And I was a blackout drinker. So a lot of those times I was blacked out. I came to in places in LA, I came to driving down a street and I had to look at signs to figure out where I was. I was in Anaheim one time. I had to somehow get back to West LA. Once I woke up and I had blown a tire, and I was going up Sepulveda. I wasn't going up Sepulveda fast. I was going up Sepulveda Boulevard because I guess the freeway was too busy for me. So I got off and I blew a tire on Sepulveda Boulevard. And, this is what I did. And I didn't think it was unusual. I didn't think it was strange. The next morning I would wake up, and I often didn't know where my car was. I would go and I'd have to walk around Hollywood just hoping I could find it, hoping there was no dents, hoping there was no blood, hoping nothing happened to my car. I always found it. I was always okay, so I kept going. I was a drunk driver in LA. And I remember the first time I got pulled over, and I was so drunk. I probably had 15 vodka cranberries and I was wasted. But as soon as I saw those lights, boom, I sobered, and I pulled over, and it was a cop with a rookie cop, and she was training the rookie cop how to do a DUI test and everything. And I nailed it. I walked the line, I did my nose, I did everything perfect, got away with it. They said, well, we're going to give you a ticket for making a wrong left turn and you can go home, and I think a normal person would probably think, oh my God, I never want to do that again, and that's not what I thought though, man. I thought, did it, got away with it, perfect. I'm a good drunk driver, I'm fine. And I was fine. I was fine until I wasn't fine. It was March of 98 that I got my first DUI. And I couldn't get away with this DUI because I was passed out. And I had hit a cop car. And I came to with the police knocking on my window, and they said, what happened? And I said, I don't know. You probably should ask him because I have no idea. And they arrested me. I had a 0.23 blood alcohol level, and I was busted. And a judge sentenced me to 90 days in a drunk driving program, and some fines and some other things, suspended my license, and also AA meetings. And I was offended by that. I was offended that one bad night and I'm an alcoholic. This judge was labeling me an alcoholic. I didn't want to go, but I thought I'd try it. I was not an alcoholic. My grandfather was an alcoholic. He was bald like I am now. He was bald and toothless, and he lived in an old plantation home in Georgia. He lived in the back room by himself, and he ate food out of a can, and he would call us up drunk, once a month, and he was an alcoholic. I was a budding movie star, and I was going to be just fine, but I would go and I'd try your AA meetings. And I remember I went to my first AA meeting was 26th and Broadway. And I had passed this house in Santa Monica many times, and I'd seen those people out with their styrofoam cups outside and thought, who are these people? What is this house? and now I found out it's AA. So I showed up 5 minutes before the meeting was going to start. I walked in, made sure not to talk to anybody, sat in the back, and the lights went out and a speaker got up there. And these speakers told the most hilarious stories I had ever heard. I was amazed. This one woman, I remember one of the first speakers I ever heard, she shared that she came to in a strange apartment, which was not new for her. This was something that she regularly did. So she got up and she gathered her clothes, and she snuck out of the apartment and she was out by the pool and someone said her name. And she was like, how do they know who I am here? And it turned out she had moved there 2 weeks earlier and she had been in a blackout for this entire time. And I was like, oh my God, this woman is crazy. She's crazy and she belongs in AA and she should stay, and I was like, that's fine, but I'm going to be okay. As chapter 3 says in our book, I took some information. I said, okay, great, you guys. Thank you for this. Thank you for that. You're all crazy. Stay here. I'm going to do it, And so I ended the AA and I got my license back, and drinking and driving was a problem. So I decided I'll stop driving. I'm going to figure this out. I lived in Santa Monica. There's lots of bars in Santa Monica. I can walk to bars. I had another friend with 2 DUIs, and he and I became road buddies, and so we would take a taxi to a bar. We would walk to a bar. We'd make our own little mile walks to different bars and make a little game out of it. We were fine. We were fine. I was doing just fine again until I wasn't, So now it's July of 99 and it's a Friday night, and I rode my bike over to a friend's house. We drank a 6-pack. We smoked some joints. I was flying pretty high. They were all going off to some party that I wasn't invited to. So I rode my bike back home, and it's 9:00 on a Friday night and I'm flying. I'm not staying home. I'm not doing it. So I got into my car. I drove to a bar. I drank all night long. It was wee hours of the morning. I'm driving home, and there's there's a tow truck sort of parked kitty corner on the road there. And I swerved to avoid the tow truck. This is in Culver City somewhere. And I hear this, and I think, oh man, I better check that when I get home, and I kept driving, and there's lights behind me, lights beside me. They cut me off. It's the tow truck is behind me. There's other cars in front of me. I'm pinned in. A guy gets out of his car and his arm is bleeding, and I'm busted. There's nowhere I can go. He's already on the phone with the cops. The cops are coming. They get there. They say, have you been drinking? And I say, just a couple, like everybody says, and they bust me, and I'm arrested for a felony hit and run. I'm a college graduate with huge potential, and I'm facing a felony hit and run, and I'm scared to death. I call my parents up. They pick me up from the La Brea station. They drive me to my little 1-bedroom apartment in Culver City, and I remember them looking at me saying, what's wrong? What's wrong with you? And I didn't have any answers for them. I can't explain how this happens. I needed to drink. That's what I needed to do. I needed to drink. And someone mentioned, I didn't hear the last speaker, but it sounded like she talked about this idea that, I didn't crave alcohol. I remember when I came into AA, when I finally came into AA, I read that in the big book, Cravings. I was like, I don't crave alcohol. I'm not an animal, what happens to me is I go to my little part-time job in the morning, and I have every intention in the world of having a good day and getting stuff done. I'm going to go to my job. I'm going to do my work. After that, I'm going to get out. I'm going to go call some agents. I'm going to work on this acting career. I'm going to get this thing started. Today is going to be an amazing day. That's every morning for me. Every morning I'm like, this is it. And I get to my little part-time job, and somebody says something that kind of bugs me or hurts my feelings. And I have this thought of, I just need a drink. Just one, just to calm down, Or what also happens, it's a great morning. I have a great morning at my job. It goes really well. And I end my little job and think, I just want one drink to celebrate, just kind of tip off the day and get myself started, And so I would go and I'd have one drink. And I just think, well, let me just follow it up with another one, 2 drinks, and I'm out of here, and I'd have the 2 drinks. And then I would change my mind, no cravings. I would just change my mind and think, tomorrow's another day, tomorrow I can call the agents. Tomorrow I can do all that stuff. I'm already having a good time here. I've had 2 drinks. Let me just have a few more. Someone orders some shots. I can't say no. This was every day. This was every day. It would happen again, and I would wake up, not know where my car is. And I couldn't explain it. And so, my parents looked at me and said, what's your problem? I had nothing to say to them, and I had to go to court. I lost my license, and they sent me to I had to go to LA County jail for a week. I finally got it down to a second DUI, but I had to go to LA County. And I was scared to death, LA County jail. I remember it was August of '99. They booked me in, and God, I never had heard the word Peckerwood in my life, but they called me Peckerwood. They said, "Hey, Wood, what are you doing?" And I was like, "I'm not doing anything. I'm fine," and I just kept my mouth shut. And it was, it was less terrifying than it was depressing, being in there and seeing those people who'd been there for a long time. And I was like, I can't do this. I remember we were booking ourselves out. We were getting out of LA County jail, and it takes like a long time. You have to go from room to room. And a lot of that time you're naked waiting for your clothes. And we're sitting in this room, and this guy says, man, when I get out of here, I am throwing away these shoes, because every time I wear these shoes, I get busted. I did not know what my problem was, but I knew it was not my shoes. I got out of that jail, and I got high immediately. I got drunk immediately. I still didn't know what my problem was, but I was going to figure it out. I was going to figure this out. I was going to beat this thing, and I tried everything. A friend of mine suggested that he was having a drinking problem, and he said, I'm not going to drink in the state where I live. And I was like, wow, that could work, because here I get in trouble, but when I could go to Vegas. I went to a wedding in New York, and I was in New York for a week, and I was free to drink, and I drank. And New York is awesome for drinking because the bars are up until 4 a.m. And so I got wasted for a week. It was awesome. I went to Chicago for a wedding, and I got drunk there. It was so successful that when I came back to LA, I thought, I'll try a few drinks, I'll try some controlled drinking. And I don't know if you've ever tried this before, but, I was at a house party. My parents were throwing a party, and they asked me to help, and I was sort of serving the drinks, and I had one beer, and I was going to drink this one beer. And, what is a casual drink? I mean, how long between drinks does a casual drinker take? I had no idea. I'd take a sip and I'd think, okay, another sip. It's like controlled drinking is impossible. And I know it says that in our big book. It says go out and try some controlled drinking. And I think, having one drink is worse than having none. I couldn't do it. And I was drinking at that party, and my parents, they're driving me home because I don't have a license. And they're driving me back to my little 1-bedroom apartment again in Culver City. And they say to me again, we saw you drinking. What's wrong with you? And I wanted to tell them how difficult this was. I wanted to say, give me a break. This is so, and I had all these things to say. And again, I had no answer for them. I was drinking again because I wanted to drink. I love drinking. It does something for me that it obviously doesn't do for them because I need it, And so I tried marijuana maintenance, which, just got my life so small. I was no longer drinking because drinking got me drunk driver tickets, but marijuana was my best friend. Marijuana never gave me a problem, So I would just go home every day from my little job and I'd get high, and I'd go to my little job and I'd get high, and my life just became this shrinking into this little apartment. And it was a nightmare, it was a nightmare. And I remembered AA, I thought back to those meetings where those crazy people were. And someone had talked about doing 30 meetings in 30 days, and I was like, who has time for that? I don't have 30 meetings in 30 days. I'm a busy guy with my little part-time job and my getting high every day and doing nothing. And so I thought, I'll try this. I'll try this 30 meetings in 30 days because AA was the only place where people seemed to have problems like mine and they were happy, So I tried it. I got the little directory, and I started going to meetings. And about day 4, I got lost. I went to the wrong meeting, and I tried a different meeting. And there was a meeting over on Ohio Street, and I went to this meeting, and it was different. It was a different kind of meeting. There was someone at the door, all dressed up, and they shook my hand and they said, "Welcome," And I walked in there, and at the cookie table, there was another actor that I had met at an audition. And I'd seen him on TV. He was a successful actor. He was doing a lot of commercials, and he was at the cookie table. And so I was able to say hi to him because I'm an actor too. This was a colleague. So I said, "Hey," and he said, "Hey." And he didn't remember me for the audition. He didn't remember me at all. But he said, "Hey, give me a call." And he gave me his phone number, And I'd been to a lot of AA meetings up to this point, but I'd never talked to anybody. And he gave me his number. And so the next day, for the first time, I was able to call somebody, because he was a fellow actor. He was a colleague. I picked up that phone, and I did that first AA call, which I'm sure you've all been through, that, "Hey, it's me. I met you last night, and you said call you, so I'm calling." I didn't know. I'm not asking you out or anything. I didn't know what to say, and fortunately he knew what to say. He jumped in and said, "Hey, I'm so glad you called. Why don't you meet me again at that meeting tonight?" And I met him again because I was at a point where I was just willing to say, okay. I was desperate. I was done. I couldn't do this anymore. So I met him at that meeting again that night, and he said, "Let me tell you how I got sober. My sponsor told me 3 things. He said, get a sponsor, get a sobriety date, and get a home group. And you hold on to those 3 things, and you can stay sober." He made it that simple for me because I was this mind was just racing with all the reasons I could not stay sober. I was in that room and I saw those 12 rules on the wall, and I saw God and all the rules, and I was like, this isn't going to work for me. And he's like, 3 things. And he also said, I suggest you go to 90 meetings in 90 days. And I was like, oh my God, who has time for 90 meetings in 90 days? But I didn't say that. Instead, I said, okay. I was desperate enough just to keep saying, okay, okay. I'll go to those meetings, and I started going to meetings every night. And this group, the Pacific group, was a very intense group, and they had little jobs at all those meetings. And I remember this guy telling me, hey, you should get one of these jobs, and I was like, who are you? Stay away from me. And I told my sponsor, I don't know if I can go to those meetings anymore because everyone's telling me to get a job at one of these meetings, and I don't want them telling me what to do. And he's like, everybody? I was like, well, no, I'm not everybody, but this one guy, he came up to me and told me what to do. And I was like, well, why don't you not talk to that guy and just talk to someone else? And I was like, all right, I'll try that. I can try that, but I don't know if it's going to work. I don't know if this thing is going to work for me. I just had so many things going on why this wasn't going to work. But he gave me simple solutions. Talk to someone else. He also said, why don't you get a job? Take one of these jobs. People do that so they can, feel comfortable in the meeting. So I took a job at a meeting, and I took another job at a meeting, and I took 7 jobs a week. I was 7 days a week. I had a little job at all those meetings. And sometimes those little jobs kept me going, Friday night was a men's stag, and I hated it. I hated going to that men's stag. I hated all those men talking about stuff, and I didn't want to be there, but I had a little job at the end where I had to sweep up the cigarette butts, and the guy who gave out the brooms was a judgmental bastard, and I was like, if I don't go, he's going to know who's, that I'm not there. And he's going to say, see, I told you that guy went and drank, and I didn't want him talking about me. So it's easier for me just to go and take my broom and do my job, and so I would go to that meeting. I'd do my job. And that's what I did. I went to meetings. I still did my little job during the day, my little part-time job. I was a part-time preschool teacher. I did my auditions, and I got 100 days sobriety. And I remember thinking, 100 days, wow, that's incredible. And I kept going. And I got a year sobriety. And this group, they do something called a watch on your year. And so what we did is we all gathered at Norm's over in Santa Monica, and I had to wear a tie, and I had to sit with some friends at a Norm's table on a Saturday night, and some of my best friends in AA are there with me, and I remember my friend Doug, he leaned over and said, how lame are we? And I was like, we are the lamest. Saturday night at Norm's, wearing a tie. Oh my God, what has happened to my life? But at the same time, we were smiling. I was smiling because I was sober for a whole year, and I knew everyone at that Norm's. Afterwards, they all sang happy birthday to me, and they all shook my hand, and I knew everyone's name. It was incredible. It was incredible. It was, I'm not saying that my life was easy. My first year, I was doing my little part-time job. I was doing some children's parties on the weekend. I was a clown. I was a clown on the weekends, and and I would go and I'd put on my makeup and I would go to these parties and I would sweat, and the kids would, and I'd get paid a little bit of money. Still not a star, not a movie star. I'm a freaking clown, and I get out of those parties and I got into my car. My car had a device in it to keep me from drinking and driving. So it was this woman's voice who would speak. So, I'd get out of this party and I'd take off my little colored wig and I'd sit down and put the key in the car. And this woman's voice would say, please provide a sample. And I remember thinking, I'm a drunk clown. I'm a freaking sober clown. And my life sucks, and I blow into my little car and I go home and my little 1-bedroom apartment, and I would just keep going. You know, I'd call my sponsor and say, I hate my life. And he'd say, you're doing great. You're doing great, you know? And I remember about a year and a half into sobriety, that sponsor was still working. You know, he was a working actor. I was not a working actor. You know, I had my little part-time preschool job, and I went to an audition. Remember, it was like for a TV show that I'd never seen, and I blew that audition. I could just tell by this woman's face that I blew it. You know, she didn't want to hear anything more. I left that office. I got in my car, you know, I'm slamming on the steering wheel, banging my head, thinking, I suck. I suck at this. I suck. What am I going to do? And I call my sponsor up, you know, and I tell him what's going on. And he's like, I don't know. I don't know what you're going to do. You know, why don't you pray about it? Which was not the answer I wanted. You know, I wanted him to say, hey, call my agent. I'll get you a job. You know, I wanted him to make this thing happen for me. And he said, pray about it. And I was working on prayer. You know, I was working on prayer. I was an atheist when I came in. I wanted nothing to do with God. In AA, I was working on my higher power. And someone earlier mentioned the set aside prayer, which is what I started to say. You know, I said, God, please help me set aside all that I think I know. Help me to see the truth about my acting, about my sobriety, about my life, you know. Help me see your plan for me. And I said that prayer every day. And strangest thing happened. I was a part-time preschool teacher, and those little kids started to grow on me. You know, I mean, I was starting to have a lot of fun in those classes. And I remember one day my agent called me up and said, hey, you got an audition at 10 a.m. And I was like, ooh, 10 a.m., you know, can I do it later? Because at 10 a.m., I had a birthday party for one of my kids, you know, little Tim. He wanted me to be at his party. And I was like, I can't go. And he's like, no, you got the 10 o'clock. That's it. You got to go. And I was like, no, I can't do it. You know, and it was a small little step. But for the first time, I realized I may not be a star, you know. I may not be an actor. I don't have to do this anymore, you know. And a year later, I was working with LA Unified School District. I was a third grade teacher in the LA Unified School District. They were paying me to be a teacher. They were also paying me to get my credential in the afternoons, you know, and they had a program for that. I was an intern, and it was incredible. You know, I mean, I was scared. You know, I had no idea what I was doing, but AA taught me, ask for help. I would go to my neighbor teachers, you know, I'd say, what are you doing today? And they're like, well, I'm doing this. I was like, can I do it too? You know, like, they're like, yes, teachers love helping. They would help me all the time. So I was the new guy all the time. I was like, help me out. You know, those 23rd graders staring at me like, what are we going to do today? And I was like, I don't know. We'll figure this out. And we did every day. We figured it out. And I was a teacher. And I suddenly had money in my pocket that stayed there. You know, my money stayed there. I had vacations. I started traveling in my vacations. You know, I remember my first vacation I took was to Mexico, and I was going to go to Mexico for 3 weeks, and I wasn't going to do AA because I'd been doing AA for like 2 years, and I didn't need 3 weeks. I could go without it, you know. And I remember week 2 of this vacation in Mexico, and I was in the city I went to wasn't like I was hoping. The woman I was staying with wasn't, you know, nothing was working out, and I was getting really irritated, and I realized I need a meeting, you know, and I'm in Playa del Carmen in Mexico, and I go downtown, and I'm like, ¿Dónde está Alcohólico Anonymous? You know, and she's like, I don't know, no sé. And she pointed towards the park. So I started walking toward the park, you know, and I'm walking to the park, and this little kid comes out, and I remember he had this long ponytail, and he's like, hey man, what you need? You know, and I was like, I don't need anything from you. You know, I'm looking for Alcohólico Anonymous. And he's like, soy doble A, you know, and this kid, he was like 3 weeks sober from drinking and like 6 weeks sober from cocaine. And he was going to take me to a meeting, you know, and he picked me up that night on his moped, and he took me to a meeting. It was all in Spanish. I didn't understand Spanish at the time, but it turns out, you know, AA speakers are kind of all It's very similar, you know. It starts off and things are bad, something happens, and at the end, everything's great, you know, and everyone's clapping. And it worked out great. I got to talk to some people. I stayed sober in Mexico. Another trip I went to China for like a month, and I had an incredible time. But in this one place, I lost my passport, my airline ticket, and I had no idea what I was going to do. You know, I was trapped. I was stuck in Guangzhou, China, and I needed a meeting. You know, and I looked up, and there was 4 Americans who lived in Guangzhou, China, and they had a meeting every Wednesday, and it was Wednesday. And we met at this restaurant, and we talked, and and I got to talk about AA, and I made it through that. And one of those guys, he was a teacher there. He was a teacher in Guangzhou. He was an international school teacher, and I had never heard of that. I was like, how does that work, you know? And he told me a little bit about it. I researched it. A year and a half later, I'm heading off to India as an international school teacher. You know, I'm living one of my dreams. I'm going to go travel the world. And of course, before I went to Mumbai, India, I researched, do they have AA? And they do have AA in India. They've got AA. People get sober in India. India, the first sobriety happened in 1951, I think. This guy named Harry, he got sober in America, and he brought the book back to New Delhi there. And so there in India, when you go to a meeting, they've got Bill, Bob, and Harry, you know, because that's how they work it there. But they're sober in India, you know. And I moved from there to Dubai, and we had lots of meetings in Dubai. And I stayed sober around the world. I've heard the 12 steps in a dozen different languages. You know, one of the things I love doing is when I go travel, and I like to go to a meeting wherever I am. I stopped teaching, but I wasn't ready to go back to the US. So I thought I would come to a different country. I traveled around Latin America for a while, and I ended up in Costa Rica. And, you know, I made sure we've got meetings. I live in San Jose. Right now we've got 2 meetings a day online. We've got 1 in-person meeting on Saturday. You know, and AA people are my friends here. AA people have always been my friends because they're the greatest people, you know. And I moved to Costa Rica about 7 years ago. And I had always had relationship problems. You know, I found that I was suffering from other addictions, you know, and I reached out to other programs, and I worked out some of my problems in other programs. And for the first time, I was able to have a relationship, you know, and I met this beautiful woman here, and she loved me, and I was able to love her, and we got married, and now we have a kid. I have a 3-year-old daughter, and she is awesome. You know, she is everything to me. She is strong-willed, and she wants things her way. And I think, I know that feeling, but she is awesome. And, you know, today, when I say I'm grateful to be here and I'm grateful to be an alcoholic, it's absolutely true. You know, I live a life. There's a speaker named Bill LaValle. He recently passed away, but I remember him speaking in our group, and he shared, you know, welcome to AA, where you can hang up your fantasies and let your dreams come true, you know. And I loved that, and that's what I was living in, a fantasy world when I came in, and today my dreams have come true. You know, I am so happy to be who I am today, to be where I am, and it's all because of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, it's all because of the principles I've learned here, and you know. Today, I'm able to say, just as someone said earlier, I'm able to say, I don't know, you know, because being in a relationship, being married, being a father, having to, you know, pay the bills, having to adult all the time, I don't know. You know, I don't know how it's going to work out. I don't know what to do. I don't know the answer, you know, and that's okay. You know, I want to be teachable today, and I want to stay out of my own way. which is really what I aim to do. And so I'm so grateful that I've found Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm so grateful that those 12 rules became 12 steps, that I've worked, that I live my life. And, those who are new here today, I hope you stick around. These Zoom meetings can be difficult. I get distracted. It's hard for me to stay focused on a Zoom meeting, but, we're going to get back face to face again. And, it's going to get better. So please stick around. I want to thank Philo again for inviting me to speak here. He came to our AA convention, which we have every year in May. We didn't have it this last year. We're not having it this year, but I'm pretty sure we're having it next year. So next May, Manuel Antonio, Costa Rica, you can come and have an incredible weekend where sobriety meets the sand and enjoy yourself. So put it on your calendar, put it on your dream list. And thank you so much for letting me be here. Thanks for letting me share. I love you all.